Beyond the grave. When a person takes their final breath, the biblical texts describe an immediate and profound transition. Most modern readers imagine a rapid journey straight to a bright heaven or a fiery hell. But the earliest original manuscripts paint a very different and much more mysterious picture of those first moments after death. To understand what actually happens when the heart stops, we must first travel back to the ancient biblical world. The earliest writers of the Hebrew Bible did not share our modern concepts of the afterlife. When kings, prophets, and ordinary people died in the ancient texts, they did not go up to the clouds. They went down into the earth. In the ancient Hebrew language, the realm of the dead was called Sheol. It was not a place of physical torture, nor was it a paradise of endless joy. Sheol was simply the grave. It was a shadowy, silent underworld where all people went, regardless of how righteous or wicked they had been during their physical lives. In this early biblical context, the first moments after death were characterized by deep silence and stillness. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, provides a stark description of this ancient belief. The text plainly states that the dead know nothing, and that there is no work, thought, knowledge, or wisdom in Sheol. For centuries, the ancient Israelites believed that death was a great equalizer. It was viewed as a state of deep sleep where all earthly activities, including praising God, ceased entirely. We see a vivid, unsettling example of this early understanding in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 28. King Saul, desperate for spiritual guidance before a massive battle, visits a medium to summon the spirit of the deceased prophet Samuel. When Samuel finally appears, he does not descend from a glorious celestial heaven. Instead, the biblical text explicitly says he comes up out of the earth. The spirit of the great prophet even complains to the terrified king, asking why Saul has disturbed his rest. This fascinating historical account demonstrates that in the early biblical period, the dead were believed to be in a state of dormant rest beneath the earth. For these ancient believers, the first moment after death was a literal descent into quiet shadows. But as centuries passed, this view began to change significantly. By the time the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon, new theological questions had emerged. If God was perfectly just, how could the righteous and the wicked share the exact same fate in the dark silence of Sheol? This terrifying question sparked a massive shift in how the ancient world understood the afterlife. In the later books of the Old Testament, such as the book of Daniel, chapter 12, we see the first clear textual references to a physical resurrection. The text prophesies that those who sleep in the dust of the earth will eventually awake. Some will rise to everlasting life, and others will rise to everlasting contempt. This meant that Sheol was no longer viewed as the final, permanent destination. It slowly became understood as a temporary waiting room for the soul. During the centuries between the Old and New Testaments, Jewish thought developed even further. Texts from this period, including the highly influential Book of Enoch, described a vast and complex spiritual realm. Enoch depicted great mountains with deep, dark hollows where the souls of the dead were kept safely separated until a final day of judgment. According to these ancient traditions, the underworld was divided into distinct compartments based on how a person had lived. One side of this realm was a place of comfort and fresh water for the righteous, which later traditions would call the bosom of Abraham. The other side was a place of darkness and torment for the wicked. By the 1st century, when Jesus began his ministry, the Jewish world was deeply divided on this issue. The Sadducees, a powerful religious and political group, rejected the idea of the afterlife entirely. They believed that when the physical body died, human existence simply ended forever. But the Pharisees, another prominent group, strongly defended the belief in angels, spirits, and a future, glorious resurrection of the dead. This divided historical context is absolutely crucial. When Jesus spoke about death, he was stepping into a fierce, ongoing theological debate. His teachings would introduce radical new concepts about what happens the exact moment a soul leaves the physical body. The silence of the ancient underworld was about to be broken forever. Continuo para a proxima parte duis. When Jesus of Nazareth began teaching in the 1st century, he did not just participate in the ongoing debates about the afterlife. He fundamentally transformed how his followers understood the transition between life and death. While the ancient texts described a silent descent into the shadowy realm of Sheol, Jesus spoke of an active, conscious, and immediate experience waiting on the other side. The most detailed and shocking glimpse into this new understanding comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. Here, Jesus tells the story of a wealthy man who lived in absolute luxury and a beggar named Lazarus who suffered outside his gates. When both men die, the text describes an immediate consequence. They do not enter a state of unconscious sleep, and they do not share the same dark destiny. Instead, the narrative reveals a sharply divided spiritual realm. Angels immediately carry the soul of the poor beggar to a place of ultimate comfort, resting at the side of the great patriarch Abraham. Meanwhile, the rich man wakes up in a place of profound torment and agonizing thirst. He can actually see Lazarus far away, separated by a massive, impassable chasm. This striking account has sparked intense debate among theologians for nearly 2,000 years. Many readers interpret this story as a literal map of the spiritual world, believing Jesus was providing a factual description of exactly where souls go the moment the heart stops beating. But other biblical scholars argue that Jesus was using a parable. They suggest he was adapting popular Jewish folklore of his time to teach a moral lesson about justice, rather than giving a strict geographical tour of the underworld. It is crucial to note the specific language used in the original Greek text. The place where the rich man suffers is called Hades. In the New Testament, Hades is often the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew Sheol, functioning as a temporary holding place for the dead. It is not the final lake of fire, which the Greek texts call Gehenna. This detail suggests that even in this terrifying story, the initial state after death is only temporary. But the most powerful statement Jesus made about the immediate afterlife happened in the final moments of his own physical life. As he hung on the cross, surrounded by violence, one of the criminals being executed next to him asked to be remembered. The response Jesus gave is one of the most significant sentences in the entire Bible regarding life after death. He did not tell the dying man that he would sleep in the dust for thousands of years. He did not say he would have to wait in the shadows until the end of the world. Instead, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." That single word, today, completely altered the Christian understanding of mortality. It promised an instant transition. The moment the criminal closed his eyes in death, he would open them in the presence of God. The word translated as paradise comes from an ancient Persian term meaning a walled, beautiful garden, echoing the original Garden of Eden. This promise of immediate, conscious fellowship with the divine became the absolute foundation of early Christian hope. Decades later, the Apostle Paul would write in his second letter to the Corinthians that he preferred to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. He also wrote to the Philippians that his desire was to depart and be with Christ, which he called better by far. However, as the early Christian movement grew across the Roman Empire, it collided with Greek philosophy. Greek thinkers taught that the physical body was merely a temporary prison for an immortal soul. Many Christians began to blend this Greek idea with the teachings of Jesus, leading to the popular modern belief that the soul escapes the body and lives forever in heaven as a purely spiritual entity. But this blending created a massive contradiction that many modern believers completely overlook. If human souls go immediately to their final destination in heaven or hell the exact moment they die, what is the purpose of the grand future resurrection? The biblical texts repeatedly speak of a final day when the skies will break, the graves will literally open, and the dead will rise. If a soul has already been enjoying the absolute bliss of paradise or suffering the agonies of Hades for centuries, why would they be pulled back into a resurrected physical body? This profound mystery, often called the intermediate state, remains one of the most heavily debated subjects in Christian history. The conflict between an immediate heavenly reward and a future physical resurrection has led to three major interpretations throughout Christian history. How theologians resolve this contradiction completely changes the meaning of the first moments after death. The first interpretation is known as soul sleep, or Christian mortalism. Supporters of this view argue that the Old Testament was right all along. They believe that human beings do not possess an immortal soul that can exist independently of the physical body. When a person dies, they lose all consciousness. They enter a state of absolute nothingness, exactly as described in the ancient book of Ecclesiastes. But how does this view explain Jesus promising the criminal on the cross that they would be together in paradise that very day? Those who argue for soul sleep point out that to an unconscious person, time does not exist. If you die and sleep in the dust for 2,000 years, your very next conscious thought will be waking up at the resurrection. From your subjective perspective, the transition is instantaneous. The second interpretation, which became the standard view for the majority of Christian history, is the concept of the conscious intermediate state. This view argues that the soul does separate from the physical body at the moment of death. However, this spiritual state is not the final heaven or the final hell. It is a temporary waiting period. We find a fascinating piece of evidence for this view in the book of Revelation, chapter 6. The text describes the souls of those who had been martyred for their faith, resting beneath a heavenly altar. They are conscious, they are speaking, and they even ask God how much longer they have to wait for ultimate justice. They are given white robes and told to rest a little longer. This striking passage strongly suggests a conscious existence that is still waiting for a future, final resolution. According to this widely held early tradition, when a believer takes their final breath, their spirit is immediately brought into the presence of God. They experience comfort, peace, and conscious communion with Christ, but they remain incomplete. They are waiting for the end of human history, when the heavens will break open and they will be reunited with a new, glorified physical body on a restored earth. In this view, the first moment after death is a moment of profound spiritual peace, but it is not the end of the story. The third interpretation builds directly upon this idea of a temporary waiting period. As the early church grew and reflected on the absolute holiness of God, a complex question arose. What happens to a person who dies with faith, but whose life is still deeply marked by flaws and imperfections? Over centuries, Catholic theology developed the doctrine of purgatory. This tradition teaches that for many souls, the immediate moment after death involves a necessary period of painful but purifying preparation before they can fully enter the divine presence. When we step back and look at the entire biblical record, from the oldest scrolls of Genesis to the final chapters of Revelation, we do not find a single flat, unchanging view of the afterlife. Instead, we find a progressive revelation. The earliest biblical writers focused entirely on the physical life, viewing the grave as a silent, shadowy end for everyone. But as historical events unfolded and prophets received new visions, the ancient Israelites began to hope for a future physical resurrection. Finally, in the 1st century, the teachings of Jesus introduced the radical promise that the soul does not have to wait in the silent dust. Through his parables and his final words on the cross, Jesus assured his followers that the transition from physical life to spiritual presence would be immediate. So, what actually happens in the first moments after death according to the Bible? If we follow the culmination of the New Testament texts, the moment the heart stops beating is not a journey to a final permanent location up in the clouds. It is a transition into an intermediate spiritual reality. For the ancient Christian, the first second after death was understood as a profound awakening. The physical world fades, and the soul enters a temporary state of conscious existence, either in the comforting presence of the divine or separated in the shadowy reality of Hades. But they are always looking forward to something greater. The souls are waiting for the final resurrection, the ultimate defeat of death itself, and the restoration of a physical, tangible universe. The biblical afterlife is not just about escaping the physical world. It is about waiting for the world to be made entirely new. If you would like our next investigation to examine exactly what the Bible says about that final day of resurrection, leave the word resurrection in the comments below. The silent darkness of the ancient grave was only the beginning of a much larger mystery.